Now it's time for edge rushers, another one of those positions that is always at the top of the draft. Let's start with the big picture view. How good a class is it, and how good are the stars? Like, where are we in relation to the likes of, the Aiden Hutchinsons, the Will Andersons of the world?
I mean, I do think that this is a pretty dang good class, man. I think that it's pretty deep. I've got either 10 or 11 of these guys in my top 200, which just put the top 200 on the PFF big board over on pff.com. So you guys can check that out right now. But there's a lot of good edge rushers, especially at the top. You talk about that star power. There's a handful of players, and I think that there's 5 guys that really have a good shot of being first-round picks. The first one is Latu from UCLA. I know that we'll probably dig into him a little bit, but I think he's one of the most prolific and precise pass rushers in the country with all his different moves. Dallas Turner, he was the edge rusher opposite Will Anderson last year at Alabama. I think he's playing even better this year, so he's somebody who's in first-round consideration. Jared Verse used to be at Albany, the FCS guy, who transferred over to Florida State and has looked the part of a first-round pick. Certainly did a lot last year, a little less this year, but I still think he's fantastic. Braylon Trice from Washington and Chop Robinson, just these 2 athletes that it truly looks like it hurts offensive tackles to try to stand in front of them and block them. That's kind of their rushing style. But I think all 5 of those guys could be first-round picks and good first-round picks too. I think going back to a theme of what we have talked about here with this 2024 draft class is there's a lot of really good talent at the premium positions. So every year we will always see teams draft quarterback, offensive tackle, edge rusher, wide receiver, shutdown corner. We will see them pick them in the first round, even when maybe they aren't surefire first round picks, because they want to take the chance on those players because they got to hit on those positions because they're so important. This year, I feel like those positions have enough players that will be worthy of those selections. And I think edge rusher is one of them. You're going to see a lot of teams want edge rushers, and there's going to be a handful of guys to choose from here.
Who is your number one guy on this list?
Latu is my number one guy on this list, the pass rusher from UCLA. I always love going through these with you because you're viewing them for the first time like mid-season, and I kind of have this, it almost goes back to what we were talking about a little bit further with Quentin Johnson. Like, I've looked at these guys for so long, since June of when we did summer scouting, and I've seen so much of these guys. So every time I kind of hear your point on them, it's kind of a fresh perspective. So I'm curious as to what you thought of Latu as well.
Yeah, so I don't think any of these guys are they're certainly not at the Bosa, Chase Young, elite of the elite, probably not even Aiden Hutchinson level of prospect. I don't even think they're at the Will Anderson level of prospect. I think they're all a tier below that, but I agree that Latu was the best of the guys that I watched. So I watched 4 of the 5 names that you gave me. I didn't get to the last one. I watched Latu, I watched Chop Robinson from Penn State, Jared Verse from Florida State, and Dallas Turner from Alabama. I didn't get to your Washington kid. Latu, I think, is definitely the best of that group. He's got really, really good hand usage. Yep. His go-to is that cross-chop move, and it almost always seems to work. He's just able to free himself up from contact all the time. He's got good but not freakish bend around the edge. He's able to keep running that arc, even turning the corner with an offensive tackle leaning on him and trying to drive him and wash him beyond the pocket. Really good closing burst. I think he can rush him inside as well. He lines up all over the place. Reminds me a little bit of Jalen Phillips, actually, from Miami.
Right.
And I think there's probably more to come from him as well. I think he's athletic enough to do a few more things than he currently does as an edge rusher. And there's some I think it's probably easier to take a guy whose go-to is attack center mass, cross chop, get around the edge of him, and sort of just say, hey, every once in a while, just run for the space, just try and attack for speed and see how it works, than it is to take a guy who's really good at doing that and teach him the more intricate cross chops and various different pass rushing moves. I think he's good and can get better.
Yeah, I think that what you mentioned at the top, his ability to always seem like he is not letting offensive tackles or offensive linemen in general get hands on him is so impressive. And I mean, it's not just him either. Whoever the defensive line coach is at UCLA, I mean, Grayson Murphy, Gabriel Murphy as well, and that defensive line, they're all the same way. Like they are taught very well, I will add, how to not let offensive linemen just like get hands on them at all. Whether they're trying to long arm them, whether they're going for a two-handed punch, whatever it is, they are ready for it and are ready to disengage. They're just the hands are always active. They're always there, whether they're swiping, whether it's a swim move, whether they're going to long arm first and catch them off guard. Like they just always seem to have a plan. And Latu's reaction speed for how he uses his hands just constantly keeps him free and allows him to attack either shoulder very, very well. So I think that he is an absolute technician. He 6'5", 265, like he's got great size. I think, like you mentioned, I think he's a really good athlete. I think he's got some really good bend for a player that's his size. It's not that rare stuff. You're right. It's not like this generational kind of feel to him, but super productive over the last 2 years, above 20% pass rush win percentage. And that is why, because he's always clean. He is always getting to one of those shoulders very, very quickly. So the pressure is there, the wins are there. And I think that you see that backfield of production from him as well. So to me, he is somebody who you draft in the top 15, top 10. You know, maybe he's not a top 3 overall, like you're thinking about him over Drake May or anything like that. But man, I think this guy's going to be a really productive pro.
No, I agree. I think he's the best of them. I think he's the cleanest guy, and I think there's just a gap between him and those like truly elite edge rushing prospects that we've seen.
So do you know anything about his background at all?
Not a thing.
Okay, so it's funny that you say that, and you saying the word clean for his prospect evaluation makes me want to bring this up. He started his career at Washington, played his freshman year at Washington, going into his sophomore year during practice, I believe, suffered a neck injury that forced him to miss that entire sophomore season at Washington. And the doctors at Washington basically medically retired him. Wow. Like said, you can't play football again. This is too dangerous. It was too severe of an injury on your spine, whatever. So he sits out that entire season. He gets kind of rechecked, I think, by other doctors, or he's just like, he's feeling better. He's getting and Washington still just did not clear him to play. He transfers to UCLA. UCLA medically clears him. And then last year was his first year playing since that freshman season at Washington, and he was an absolute animal. And then this year, again, he's an absolute technician. So the neck injury is going to be something that gets brought up throughout the draft season because it's going to get medically rechecked at the combine, and people are going to talk about that. But if you did, I was kind of hoping that you didn't know the background because not knowing the background, you probably got no reservations about taking him as a top 10 pass rusher. Yeah. But knowing that there's the injury there, it might affect his draft stock a little bit. So that context is important when you guys are thinking about Latu.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see if there's a difference of opinion, like if the NFL is split on whether that's a thing. Like some guys just take him off the board because their medical guys won't clear him and say, no, that's not. Or if it was a case of like Washington's medical people basically just didn't want to reverse what they thought a year ago, and didn't want to contradict themselves a year later down the line, and it was sort of more of a stubborn sticking to a diagnosis deal with him rather than actually this is a thing where half the NFL teams are going to say, no, we're out on this and we're not grabbing that guy. What was interesting from him from an on-the-field perspective is contrasting him in particular with Chop Robinson, because Robinson is like way more twitchy, way more explosive, but has like none of the hand usage. It's like almost the opposite player. He reminded me a lot of Byron Young last year from Tennessee, where it's like this dude is one of the most like explosive, twitchy, athletic, fluid, gifted pass rushers in the draft who has almost no clue what he's doing, right? And if you can teach him what he's doing, now you've got something pretty special. And he's a guy who's crushing it so far, next to Aaron Donald with the Rams. Robinson, I think, is not quite like he's not that clueless when it comes to actually what he's doing, what he's his technique. But it reminded me a lot of that, where it's like, wow, from an athletic standpoint, this guy's got it all. From a technique standpoint, less so.
Yeah, and you saw last year the pass rush win percentage for Chop was over 20%. He had a pass rush grade 92.4. It's one of the highest in the country. He had 53 pressures that season. And so, like, this guy was extremely productive last year, and I think it really just stems from he was more athletic than offensive tackles were ready for him to be. I mean, his first step explosion, the bend, you mentioned, just that quick twitch, the violent nature of him. He just basically used bull rush moves and speed to power stuff, and he was pretty much unblockable against a lot of offensive tackles last year. This year it's different, because I think this year Big Ten teams know what he is, and it's like, hey, if we can kind of game plan a little bit for what he's going to do, which is just that bull rush, speed to power type of game, we can neutralize it a little more. And during the first portion of this season, like, he was not really effective. Like, he was getting shut down by a lot of these offensive tackles, and he had one of the more surprisingly lower grades and efficiency numbers from a lot of those top tier pass rushers. But you mentioned this is going to be the most athletic pass rusher that we have in this class, and I do agree with you. I think he's further along than Byron Young was, but that's the type of player that we're talking about here. Is right. You want Robinson to go to a team with a really good defensive line coach who can get more out of him when it comes to hand usage and pass rush moves and things like that. Because if you combine that with that first step explosiveness and how he can threaten that outside shoulder at all times, now you are talking about a potential difference-making takeover type of edge rusher. So because of athleticism alone, I think that he is also a guy that you would pick in the top 15.
Yeah, and I think, like, there's also differences with Byron Young. Like, he's only 20 now, right? Like, he's much younger, much less sort of he's not just relying on being an older, more experienced guy. Like, there are other differences, which is why he's going to end up going a lot higher than Byron Young did, even independent of the fact that he's further along from a technique standpoint.
Right.
It's interesting. There was a play against Iowa, I think, where like, they're prepared for him. They know what he can do. And yet there's a play where he literally just runs right around the left tackle. The left tackle barely touches him. He just buries the quarterback in the ribs. Like the Daniel Jones meme, where he just drops back, like, and then just drilled in the side.
Yes.
At the drop, at like 9 yards deep, he just run right around the left tackle on the arc. Left tackle barely touches him. And you're like, they knew that was coming and still couldn't even come close to stopping it.
And that's Chop Robinson. The best part about him is that he has this, like, old school aesthetic to him where, one, he wears the number 44 as an edge rusher. So, like, already kind of ugly, but if you're good, you can sometimes pull it off. He goes no gloves, so he just goes, like, bare hands.
He was out there
nothing. Just like long sleeves, just like regular ass long sleeves. No, like, shooter sleeve, no armbands, no nothing. It is long sleeves. It is typical height shoulder pads, the number 44, and no gloves. And you know what? I respect it.
I forget which game it was. There was one game where he didn't even have the sleeves. He was out there, bare sleeves, no wrist, anything.
Like he's a walk-on.
No tape, no gloves, just out there raw dogging it. Nothing, right? Trying to, like, go one-on-one with offensive tackles. And you're like, what is this? This is madness.
Like, he's a walk-on. And, like, for Penn State, they don't have their names on the back of the jersey, so it really does look like he's just we need a body in here. Get 44. Throw 44 in there.
I think his biggest problem, certainly relative to Latu, is, like, he gets stuck on blocks. He doesn't have that hand usage.
Right.
He doesn't have that ability to disengage. Yes. And if a guy gets hold of him, he just gets, like, washed out of the play, and he's done. And occasionally he'll be able to sort of just muscle through it and like impact the quarterback, but he's basically done on the play. Whereas Latu disengages, right? You're not keeping hold of him for any period of time. That's what Robinson really needs to add to his game, and then you've got something special.